What's going on? Welcome to the First Down Football Podcast. My name is Andrew Gruniskis, and today we're going to be getting into our first mock draft of the NFL 2026 offseason. So without further ado, let's get right into it. With the first pick of the 2026 NFL Draft, I don't need to spend too much time on this one. The Las Vegas Raiders are going to select Fernando Mendoza, quarterback out of Indiana, Heisman winner, going to be the first overall pick and national champion. Mendoza has done it all. He's shown that he has the accuracy to be an NFL level quarterback. Is he going to be a top tier guy? That's yet to be seen. The comp that I kind of draw from watching him is a lot of Jared Goff, so that's kind of what you're getting with Mendoza. So it warrants the first overall pick here, and that's what the Raiders are going to do with their vacancy at quarterback. With the second overall pick, the New York Jets are going to go Arvell Reese, edge rusher from Ohio State. Another almost chalk pick. It seems like it's either Arvell Reese or David Bailey here at number 2 for the Jets. However, I think there's a lot more upside with Arvell Reese's game. Athletic freak, can play off ball, but also is very unpolished as a pass rusher, but has freakish athleticism and can develop into one of the best pass rushers in the league. So I think Arvell Reese here makes a ton of sense for the Jets. At pick 3, I'm going to go with Ruben Bain from Miami. I think the Cardinals need edge rusher, and that's no secret. They came in one of the bottom in the leagues in sacks. So an edge rusher here makes sense. Now, is it Ruben Bain? Is it David Bailey? We'll see. I don't think the arm length will scare away teams, especially not the Cardinals, because of the production that Ruben Bain has had throughout his career. So going Ruben Bain here makes sense as opposed to David Bailey, who is still raw and is a little bit undersized as an edge rusher. So we'll see where he ends up landing. I actually have him going 4 here to the Tennessee Titans. I think a lot of people have kind of chalked in Jeremiah Love here, but the Titans are not in a position at all to draft running back. They're still a very unfinished roster and need to continue to develop that edge rusher. Right now, I understand they traded for Jermaine Johnson, but there still is a huge hole there at edge rusher. Grabbing a guy like David Bailey here allows that front seven to kind of be solidified going into next season and young and can develop in that new Robert Saleh system. So I think the run on edge rushers here makes a lot of sense. I'm going to switch it up a little bit for the New York Giants pick. I'm going to have them going Sonny Styles, linebacker from Ohio State. I understand that they signed Tremaine Edmonds. However, there still is a hole in that linebacking unit. They're starting Darius Mausa. I don't even know how to pronounce that name. Former 6th-round pick in 2024. Not really a guy that's going to be there for the foreseeable future. I understand they brought back Micah McFadden, but again, it's kind of more of a depth piece. I think getting a guy like Sonny Styles, who didn't miss a tackle all season until that game against Miami in the playoff, is a no-brainer pick. He's one of my blue chip prospects, and I understand drafting a linebacker at 5 here isn't that common in the NFL, but when you're getting a guy like Sonny Styles, someone who can develop into a Fred Warner type player, it makes a lot of sense here for the Giants. With pick 6, I have the Cleveland Browns selecting Carnell Tate, wide receiver from Ohio State. I debated between going offensive line. I think this is a popular pick for the Browns. I think they've done enough in free agency where they don't necessarily have to overdraft offensive line here. I think a popular pick is Monroe Freeling or Francis Mauigoa. However, Mauigoa has some concerns if he can actually play tackle or not, and the Browns traded for Titus Howard, who naturally plays right tackle. So have to do a lot of shuffling around the offensive line. I think DeJuan Jones is someone that you're okay with at left tackle for right now, and just kind of see what you have with him. But you bring in Zion Johnson, you bring in Elton Jenkins and Tevin Jenkins as well, and your interior of the offensive line is solid, so it doesn't warrant having to draft Maui Noah and move him to guard. I think getting playmakers is the best thing right now that you can do for Shedeur Sanders just to see if he's really the real deal or not. Right now, your receiving core is Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, and Isaiah Bond. So kind of missing, that guy that can come in and week out, be that prototypical X receiver and that number one target for whoever is quarterbacking the Browns, whether it's Sanders or Watson, makes a lot of sense here at 6. At pick 7, I have the Washington Commanders selecting Jordan Tyson. I think he's fallen down the boards a little bit just because of the injury risk, which makes sense. He struggled to stay on the field, but when healthy, he could be the best receiver in this class. Catches everything, very good route runner, knows how to find space in zone coverage, and it makes a lot of sense when you look at the Commanders' wide receiving core. Now that they lost Deebo Samuel, it kind of is just Terry McLaurin. You have Luke McCaffrey and a couple of other depth pieces, but Jordan Tyson here makes a lot of sense to pair with Terry McLaurin. I debated going Mekhi Lemon. I think the upside on Jordan Tyson is a little higher. For that reason, I'm sticking with Jordan Tyson here at 7. But with pick 8, I have the New Orleans Saints selecting Mekhi Lemon, wide receiver from USC. I love this fit. This is probably one of my favorite landing spots for Mekhi Lemon. It would be the Saints, and then probably number 2 would be the Rams. I think it makes a ton of sense. You look at the receiving core right now. They brought in, or they have Chris Olave there right now. But outside of Olave, the receiving core leaves a lot to be desired. It's a lot of depth pieces. They have Devon Vele, who they acquired from the Denver Broncos last year. But the opportunity here to get a premier slot receiver and a guy that can really work out of that Z position as well, I think it makes too much sense for this fit to be Mekhi Lemon. And I think the signing of Travis Etienne Jr. really puts them out of play for Jeremiah Love. So I really like this landing spot here for Mekhi Lemon. At pick 9, I have the Kansas City Chiefs drafting Caleb Downs. I mean, it makes sense. One of the best players in the draft falling to one of the best teams in the league. Caleb Downs is another guy that I have as a blue chip prospect in this draft class. Obviously, with positional value, he drops here a little bit. Safeties aren't drafted as high. We saw this with Kyle Hamilton a couple drafts ago. But I think Caleb Downs would be a true chess piece for this defense. He'd be able to line up in the box, at slot corner, and in the deep half of the field. The Chiefs just lost Brian Cook, and they lost a lot of their corners as well. Bringing in a key piece to the secondary and a guy who can contribute at a high level on day one just makes too much sense here for the Chiefs. At pick 10, I have the Bengals going a little bit out of the box here. I have them selecting Vega Ioane, guard from Penn State. He's personally my top offensive lineman, and the Bengals have an inconsistent rotation right now at interior offensive line. So I think selecting Ioane here and getting someone who is going to be the focal point of that offensive line, which has struggled for so many years and been criticized for so many years, makes sense. There's not really a huge defensive piece that I would select here. The board kind of fell in a way that it doesn't make sense for the Bengals. I mean, the best defensive position on the board right now is corner with Mansour Delane and Jamal McCoy. But the Bengals, that's probably the only position they're solidified at on their defense. So grabbing Ioane here makes a ton of sense and get Joe Burrow some protection. At pick 11, I have the Miami Dolphins actually trading this pick. It's not something I was going to do going into this mock, but I think the way the board has fallen, it just makes too much sense. So I have the Miami Dolphins trading this pick to the Chicago Bears. I think it makes a ton of sense for the Bears to want to move up, and the Dolphins are in rebuild mode, grabbing the first round pick next year from the Chicago Bears and giving back pick 75 in this year's draft class allows them to focus on the future a little bit and focus on the rebuild going on. While the Chicago Bears are in prime compete now mode, I have them moving up to select Jeremiah Love, and maybe not a landing spot that a lot of people have for Jeremiah Love, but it makes sense when you look at 2 years, 3 years ago now. When the Lions were at 12, they selected Jahmyr Gibbs. Jeremiah Love is kind of in that same range of running backs as Gibbs coming out of college. Ben Johnson was there as the offensive coordinator for the Lions when they selected Gibbs. So moving up for a guy like Jeremiah Love in that offense, I think it makes too much sense. And the Dolphins get what they need out of this trade as well by moving back and also picking up another first round pick for next year. The Dallas Cowboys, I have selecting Mansour Delane, the first corner off the board. He really is a shutdown corner. He may not have some of the interception production that you'd like to see out of a guy you're drafting in the top 15, but that's because a lot of teams just simply did not throw his way. Mansour Delane is probably my number one corner just because of the health concerns of Jermon McCoy. So it's a little bit of a higher floor player. So it makes a ton of sense, this pairing, and it's a pretty common mock spot for Mansour Delane here. At pick 13, I have the LA Rams selecting Omar Cooper. This is a landing spot that I really like. We've seen the rumors of the Rams wanting to improve at the receiver position, potentially trading for AJ Brown. I think getting a guy like Omar Cooper, who is a little bit underrated here, you see on this website they have Omar Cooper ranked as the 34th player. Personally, on my board, he's more around 15 because he simply just has great run after catch ability. He probably has the second best run after catch ability in this class behind Mekhi Lemon, and would be perfect pairing him with Puka Nacua in this offense. They get younger at the receiver position, and they also pick up a third guy that they've been so desperately needing. It's kind of been Puka, and it was Kupp for a long time, and now it's Puka and Devontae Adams. But picking up a third guy is definitely an upgrade over a guy like Tutu Atwell or Van Jefferson, guys that have kind of been in that third receiver role over the last couple of years and really going all in to win now with Matthew Stafford. This pick just makes too much sense. With pick 14, I have my Baltimore Ravens selecting Francis Mauigoa, offensive lineman from Miami. He probably projects more as a tackle compared to Spencer Fano. Right now, the Ravens currently at that right tackle spot have Roger Rosengarten, who is coming off a down year in his second year. I think Mauigoa or Rosengarten can kick into that guard spot and fill a need for the Baltimore Ravens. At pick 15, I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers selecting Jermon McCoy, corner from Tennessee, a guy who probably would be a top 8 pick if he played last year. Coming off an ACL injury, hasn't done any testing, so his pro day will be an interesting one. But I think there's too much upside. The Buccaneers desperately need corner after Jamel Dean left in free agency. And it's a really good pairing. I mean, the Bucs secondary struggled last year, especially down the back half of their losing streak. So picking up a high upside guy like Jermon McCoy makes a lot of sense here. With the Jets' second first round pick of this draft, I have them selecting Avion Terrell, corner from Clemson. He's a guy that a lot of people thought throughout the draft cycle that he would project as more of a slot corner, but he actually tested out okay. He measured at 6'1", so he can play that outside corner role. The Jets brought in Nashawn Wright, who is an upgrade in that secondary, but outside of that, they don't really have any corners, and they had 0 interceptions on defense last year, so going corner here makes a lot of sense, especially because there's no, again, real playmaker. I thought about Kenyon Sadiq, but they've invested too much at tight end. over the last couple of years through the draft, and I think Avion Terrell would be their best pick right now. With pick 17, I have the Detroit Lions selecting Monroe Freeling, tackle from Georgia. Really, the only weak spot on that offense right now is their left tackle position. They cut Taylor Decker, who could potentially come back on a cheaper deal. However, it doesn't really look that way right now. And they brought in Larry Borum, who's kind of just a depth piece swing tackle, not a guy that you want to roll out there as your starting left tackle, protecting your quarterback's blind spot. So a guy like Monroe Freeling here, who plays vicious yet athletic, is a perfect fit for this offensive line. You look at guys like Penei Sewell, who fit that mold, Tate Ratledge, who fit that mold. I think this pickup for the Lions just makes too much sense. I would not be surprised if Monroe Freeling is gone by this point. However, in this mock draft, he fell here to the Lions at 17. At pick 18, I have the Minnesota Vikings selecting Dylan Tiedemann, safety from Oregon. He really is a dynamic playmaker, as we saw throughout this season, but also how he tested at the combine running in the 4.3s. He's a guy that really could be a difference maker for this secondary. Obviously, a couple years ago, we saw the Vikings strike out in the first round on Lewis Cine, but right now there's a huge gap in that secondary, and Dylan Tiedemann would be the perfect guy to come in and fix that hole in that Brian Flores defense. At pick 19, I have the Carolina Panthers selecting Kenyon Sadiq, tight end, Oregon. I think this fit just makes too much sense. It's a guy who could go a lot earlier because of the way he tested the combine, running the fastest 40 ever for a tight end in the NFL combine. And it looks like the Panthers are trying to go all in right now. They just dished out $30 million a year to Jalen Phillips. They paid Devin Lloyd a boatload of money as well. Now it's time to focus on the offensive side of the ball. Kenyon Sadiq is an upgrade over guys like Tommy Tremble and over guys like Jatavian Sanders. I think if you're truly trying to go all in, you have to get Bryce Young, a true number one tight end, and someone who can really space the field as well, and that's Kenyon Sadiq. The Cleveland Browns move up to pick 20 here from pick 24. The compensation was just swapping pick 20 for pick 24, and the Browns throw in number 107. So the Cowboys pick up an additional fourth to move back a couple spots. I think this is an ideal trade back spot for the Cowboys because they don't necessarily have anyone that's worth taking at a position of need right now. But the Cleveland Browns get to jump up over teams like the Steelers, like the Chargers, and select a guy like Spencer Fano, who is in play at pick 6, who happened to fall here at pick 20. It's a guy you could really put anywhere on your offensive line. I know we touched upon it earlier, how the Browns kind of were able to band-aid that offensive line well enough that it's serviceable, but grabbing a guy like Fano, who only allowed 1 sack last year, makes sense, and you can put him at wherever you need a position, whether it's right guard. I know they have Tevin Jenkins there, who's been very inconsistent throughout his career, so he can play that right guard spot. Or if you really need him to slide in at left tackle, if DeJuan Jones is not cutting it, Spencer Fano can also play that as well. He probably projects better in the league as an interior offensive lineman, but the Browns need all the offensive linemen they can get right now, and grabbing a guy like Fano here at pick 20 is a steal. Going back into the offensive lineman group, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers selecting Caden Proctor, offensive lineman from Alabama. I think he fits more in this offense as a guard. I know the Steelers have invested a lot into their tackle position through the draft over the last couple of years, but they just lost Isaac Seumalo at that left guard position. Proctor is a guy who's 6'7". However, he can play that guard position and be a truly great run blocker in this offense. He lacks athleticism, so putting him on an island out at tackle may not be ideal for Proctor, but he should be able to come in and be a day one starter at guard for the Pittsburgh Steelers. At pick 22, I have the run of offensive linemen continuing with the Los Angeles Chargers selecting Emmanuel Pregnon, guard from Oregon. This is a guy who I'm very high on. He's in my top 20 players, I believe, on my board. He's 6'5", just an absolute mauler, but also very technical, good movement skills. And the Chargers need guard, especially after losing Zion Johnson and potentially cutting Mekhi Becton. We still have yet to see how that saga ends, but their guard position was very underwhelming last year, especially for the money they and the draft capital they had invested in it. So grabbing a guy like Emmanuel Pregnon to shore up that hole makes a lot of sense here at 22. For the Eagles at 23, I have them selecting Keldrick Falk. This is a guy that will get a lot of criticism and has gotten a lot of criticism throughout the draft process so far because he only had 2 sacks last year at Auburn. But he's a guy that's high upside. He's going to be 20 years old while the draft is taking place. And it's a guy who has freakish athleticism. At worst, he'll come in and be a great run defender for you. But in this Philly defense, where he's going to be facing a lot of one-on-one blocks, I believe that he can develop into a double-digit sack guy. So it makes sense here, especially right now. You don't really have an edge rusher that can come in and be productive. You have Nolan Smith. You signed Arnold Ebiketie. But you're still waiting on that guy that can have that production. I think Keldrick Falk in this defense can be the guy that replaces the production of Jalen Phillips and much more. At pick 24, I have the Dallas Cowboys selecting C.J. Allen, linebacker from Georgia. It's a little bit of a reach in my opinion, but I don't really see the Cowboys having any other big needs. And C.J. Allen is a guy who's a little bit undersized, maybe not the production you'd like to see out of a first-round linebacker, but he's a guy that has high intangibles and is very smart. And so having someone like that quarterbacking your defense will go a long way, especially when you look at the lack of linebackers, stand-up linebackers in the Cowboys defense right now. Whether it's Shamar James or Demarion Overshown, guys that are kind of unproven, C.J. Allen would kind of fit that last gap and fix that hole in the Cowboys defense. And it makes sense. A lot of people may like Jacob Rodriguez better than C.J. Allen. I personally have Jake Golday higher than C.J. Allen, but I think the pick makes sense here for the Dallas Cowboys. With the 25th pick, I have the Miami Dolphins selecting Colton Hood, cornerback out of Tennessee. Again, the Dolphins desperately need whatever they can get. They're in full rebuild mode. And so with their first pick, after trading back from 11 to 25 here with the Chicago Bears, they grab a guy who was a really productive corner at Tennessee who filled the shoes of Jermon McCoy and can be a guy that is going to step in and be the best corner on that roster and a guy that will really have the potential to develop into a truly special corner in the league. So grabbing a high upside guy here like Colton Hood makes a ton of sense for a team that's in rebuilding mode like the Miami Dolphins. With the 26th pick, I have the Buffalo Bills selecting Caleb Banks, first defensive tackle off the board. I think Banks has the potential to go a lot higher. His ceiling is probably that 10th overall pick to the Bengals. But this is a guy that has freakish athleticism. He's 6'6", over 300 pounds. Really limited production just because he hasn't been on the field a ton for Florida. But next to Ed Oliver and now you bring in a guy like Bradley Chubb, he has the potential to be a run stuffer, but also a guy that can get after the passer. And that's what the Buffalo Bills truly need from the interior of their defensive line, someone that can sack the quarterback and pressure while only rushing 4. So Caleb Banks makes a lot of sense. He's personally not my defensive tackle 1, but I think the fit here for the Bills, getting a freakish athletic guy, similar to how Jordan Davis was coming out just without the production, makes a lot of sense. With pick 27, I have the San Francisco 49ers select Blake Miller. I think the right tackle spot was very inconsistent last year for the San Francisco 49ers, and that's kind of what stalled their offense down the stretch was inconsistent line play. So grabbing a guy like Blake Miller who tested really well at the combine and will you'd be a tackle that can come in at right tackle and be super athletic will help this offense and help Brock Purdy, help the run game. He could potentially go higher than this as well because there's not a lot of true tackles. It's probably Monroe Freeling and then Blake Miller as the best true tackles. Some debate for Francis Malinois. But the pick makes sense here. Solidify that O line, especially with the unknown future of Trent Williams and this franchise. Grab a guy that will be there for the foreseeable future. With pick 28, I have the Houston Texans selecting Caden McDonald, defensive tackle, Ohio State. If you watch Ohio State, you just watch how Caden McDonald is able to stuff the run. And that's something that the Texans lacked in their playoff win or playoff loss against the New England Patriots was, well, A, the turnovers, but B, being able to stop the run. Bringing in a guy like Caden McDonald who can do that while you could also get pressure from your edge rushers, Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson, really solidifies this front four for the Houston Texans and makes them, again, one of the best defenses in the league. At pick 29, I have the Kansas City Chiefs selecting Zion Young, edge rusher from Missouri. Maybe this is a little bit of a reach. I don't believe so, just because I think his upside is so high and he has the ability to be one of the best edge rushers out of this class. He's a guy with freakish athleticism and power, and you really need someone to be that 1A to George Karlaftis for that defense. So grabbing an edge rusher here like Zion Young makes a ton of sense here for the Kansas City Chiefs. Miami Dolphins desperately need a receiver here, especially after trading away Jalen Waddle. I originally had Casey Concepcion here to Miami Dolphins, but I don't think it makes a ton of sense because you're basically trading Jalen Waddle for a worse version of Jalen Waddle. So I look at a guy like Chris Bell, a guy who was pretty much a lock to go top 25 in the first round before his ACL injury in November. Chris Bell is a prototypical X receiver who will be able to instantly step up and be the number one option for the Miami Dolphins. There was reports today that he's ahead of his recovery schedule. So him being back in time for the offseason should not be a huge worry like preseason. So I think it's a guy that can come in, be a true number one, and has tremendous upside for Malik Willis, who really is lacking weapons right now. And I'm probably higher on Chris Bell than most. I know a lot of people have him going in the second or third round because of the injury, but I think he has the highest upside of the receivers still on the board, whether that's Brazzell, whether that's Denzel Boston, whether that's Casey Concepcion. So selecting Chris Bell here makes a lot of sense for the Miami Dolphins because you don't need him to produce in year one either because they are in a rebuilding phase. With pick 31, I have the New England Patriots selecting Akeem Mesidor, edge rusher from Miami. Mesidor had the highest pressure rate out of any edge rusher in this class last year. He is an older prospect. He's going to be 25 before he ever takes a snap on an NFL field, meaning now that he's being drafted in the first round in this mock, he will be 30 before his second contract. But the Patriots just made the Super Bowl. They're in a win now mode. And Akeem Mesidor makes a ton of sense. They went out and signed Draymond Jones. However, they lost Caleb on Jason. I don't think Harold Landry is getting it done right now. So bringing in a guy like Akeem Mesidor, who can be a day one instant impact from that edge rusher position, makes a lot of sense for this Patriots defense. With the last pick in the first round of this first 2026 NFL mock, I have the Seattle Seahawks going with another edge rusher. I have them going with Malachi Lawrence, a guy who's a little bit lower on these rankings, but I think his upside is so tremendous. He is a freaky athlete, just like we've been talking about with a lot of these edge rushers, and can truly get after the passer. He's going to lack a little bit when it comes to run defense, but they don't really need him to be that guy that plays three downs right now from the edge rusher position. Demarcus Lawrence's future is in question just because he's getting up there in age. But this would be another guy that can come in and be a huge part of that edge rotation and also take over for Demarcus Lawrence after his time in Seattle is done. You have Uchenna Nwosu and Derek Hall, guys that are productive from the edge rusher position. They lost Boye Mafe, who wasn't a huge piece of that defense, but got a lot of reps there at the edge rusher position. I think Malachi Lawrence, with his upside, makes a ton of sense, especially in this defense where he doesn't have to step in and be a three down guy right away. He can be a third down specialist and truly put up some crazy sack numbers in his first year in this defense. That's going to be it for the video today. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to subscribe and like for more mock draft and draft content. We're going to be pumping it out all through the month of April leading up to the draft. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.